The great convocation chamber on Aegis Station was designed to inspire awe and diminish the individual. Its ceiling was a dome of captured starlight, a swirling, slow-motion ballet of nebulae and distant galaxies. The floor was a single, unbroken disk of obsidian, so polished it reflected the cosmic light above, making the delegates feel as if they were floating in a void between two heavens. At the center of this void sat the negotiation table, a ring of luminous, pearlescent material that shifted in hue with the ambient emotional tenor of the room. For 3 cycles, it had held a steady, cool blue of calm deliberation. Now it was beginning to bleed into a nervous violet. No one was looking at the table. All eyes, or the analogous sensory organs of the 6 species present, were fixed on the space between 2 chairs. It was here that Lord Vindicator Kalen of the Cathar Imperium was performing his slow, deliberate circle. Kalen was a magnificent and terrifying creature. Standing over 2.5 meters tall, he was a study in avian lethality. His plumage was the color of a stormy sky, shot through with filaments of metallic silver that shimmered with his every movement. A sharp, hooked beak, designed for tearing flesh, jutted from a noble head crowned with a crest of iridescent feathers. His feet, ending in 4-toed talons of black, keratinous horn, made no sound on the obsidian floor. He moved with a liquid grace that was utterly predatory. He was a warlord king from a race of hunters, and he was currently hunting. His prey was Elias Thorne, the human delegate. Thorne did not look like prey. He sat perfectly still in his designated chair, one hand resting on the table, the other in his lap. He wore the simple, dark gray uniform of the Terran diplomatic corps, unadorned with medals or ostentatious rank insignia. He was of average height, with dark hair cut short and a face that was neither handsome nor ugly, but simply there. It was a face that could be easily forgotten, except for the eyes. His eyes were the color of sea ice, a pale, flat blue-gray, and they were utterly, unnervingly calm. As Kalen completed his second circuit, his shadow falling across the human, Thorne finally moved. It was not a flinch or a startle. He turned his head slowly, his neck pivoting with an economy of motion that was almost mechanical. His gaze met Kalen's. In that moment, a silent, primal conversation took place that transcended language and protocol. Kalen's posture was a declaration of dominance, a physical assertion of superiority honed over millennia of Cathar evolution. "I am the predator. You are the prey. Know your place." Thorne's response was not one of defiance, not of fear, and not of aggression. It was something far more unsettling. His body remained relaxed, his breathing even. His eyes, those dead calm pools of ice, held no anger. They held only a quiet, profound certainty. They did not say, "I will fight you." They did not say, "I am not afraid." They said, "If you force this, there is only one possible outcome. It will be ugly and it will be final and you will have started it. But I will finish it." It was the serene confidence of a man who had not only accepted the possibility of violence, but had lived it, understood its terrible arithmetic, and knew, with the conviction of a law of physics, exactly how to deploy it. It was the calm of a landslide before the first stone shifts. Across the vast table, the other delegates felt the change. Delegate Ool of the Cygnian hegemony, a being whose chitinous exoskeleton was normally a placid beige, began to flush a mottled, anxious brown. It tapped a delicate manipulator claw against the tabletop in a staccato rhythm of distress. Matriarch Vorl of the Glyptodan Enclave, a creature of immense age and patience whose form resembled a mountain of living, sculpted rock, retracted her head a fraction of an inch into her great carapace. It was the most hurried movement anyone had ever seen her make. The luminous delegate, a shimmering column of coherent light named J-Hill, wavered, its form momentarily losing cohesion as it processed the raw, unspoken intent radiating from the human. But the most telling reaction came from the Lord Vindicator himself. As his raptor-like eyes locked with Thorne's, as he processed the utter lack of prey response, the sheer, absolute finality in the human's gaze, something deep within his biology took over. A vestigial, involuntary reflex from a time before his species had starships, from a time when they were not always the apex predator. Click. The sound was small, barely audible in the vast chamber. It was the sound of the hyoid apparatus in Kalen's throat seizing, a muscular spasm that slammed his glottis shut. It was the instinctive Cathar reaction to encountering a threat so unexpected, so alien in its nature, that the body's only response was to brace for a death blow. Kalen froze mid-stride. His magnificent crest of feathers, which had been fanned in a display of dominance, drooped almost imperceptibly. He had circled a herbivore and found a basilisk. The silence in the room became a physical weight. No one spoke. No one acknowledged the standoff. To do so would be to admit that the delicate fabric of diplomacy had just been shredded by something ancient and brutal. The violet hue of the table deepened, pulsing faintly. Elias Thorne held Kalen's gaze for 2 more heartbeats, then turned his head back to face the center of the table. He blinked once slowly, and his hand in his lap relaxed. The landslide had settled back into a mountain. The moment was over, but it was not. It was just the beginning. The formal topic of the session was the allocation of FTL transit lanes through the Seraphim Nebula, a matter of considerable economic importance to the Cygnians and Cathar. Delegate Ool, its composure regained through a sheer effort of will, cleared its vocalizer. As per Subarticle 4, Section B of the Preliminary Accord, it chirped, its voice a series of precise, modulated clicks. The hegemony posits that navigational priority should be granted based on the principle of historical usage, weighted by tonnage volume over the last 5 standard cycles. Lord Vindicator Kalen returned to his seat. His movements were stiff, lacking their earlier predatory fluidity. He settled into his high-backed chair, his talons gripping the perch built into its base. When he spoke, his voice was a low rasp, a harsh sound like grinding stones that the universal translator smoothed into perfect, uninflected galactic standard. The Imperium disputes the very premise of historical usage. The nebula was charted by Cathar surveillance. The initial beacons were laid by Cathar engineering. Our claim is one of first discovery and development, a right superior to that of mere cargo hauling. It was the same argument they had been having for days, but the tone had shifted. The casual arrogance was gone from Kalen's voice. It was replaced by a rigid, almost brittle formality. He did not look at Thorne, but his awareness of the human was a palpable force in the room. He was a predator that had been forced to acknowledge another predator, and the entire dynamic of the hunt had changed. Elias Thorne said nothing. He had not been scheduled to speak on this topic. Humanity, as the newest arrivals on the galactic stage, had no claim in the Seraphim Nebula. They were observers here, petitioners seeking membership in this council of elder races. Their role was to be quiet, to be deferential, to be small. But Thorne was no longer small. His silence was now louder than any speech. It was a canvas against which the other delegates painted their own fears and speculations. What was this species? These humans, these soft-skinned, bipedal mammals from a forgotten corner of the Orion Arm. Their initial presentation had been so unremarkable. They had shared data on their biology, their history, their technology. It was all very standard, very unassuming. They spoke of peace, of cooperation, of a desire to learn. Now, that narrative was suspect. Matriarch Vorl, whose species thought on geological timescales, re-evaluated her assessment. The Glyptodons had seen countless species rise and fall. The flashy, aggressive ones often burned out quickly. The quiet, adaptable ones were the ones that endured. She had initially classified humanity as a minor, ephemeral race, a footnote in the grand galactic history. She now considered that this might have been a grave error in judgment. J. Hill, the luminous, felt the change most acutely. It perceived emotions not as metaphors but as tangible waves of psychic energy. Before the confrontation, Thorne had been a point of placid curiosity, a quiet hum of disciplined thought. When Kalen began his circle, that hum had not spiked into fear or anger. It had simply condensed. It had collapsed into an infinitely dense point of pure potential, a singularity of purpose. J. Hill had felt the shape of it, the cold, clean logic of applied violence, stripped of all malice or passion. It was the most terrifying thing the Luminous had encountered in its 3,000 years of existence. The concept of first discovery is a primitive one. Ool clicked back at Kalen, its own agitation making it more pedantic. Galactic law is built upon a framework of established, continuous use. To grant sovereignty based on a single survey mission would be to invite chaos. It is your laws that invite chaos, bureaucrat, Kalen growled, his composure fraying. He was trying to reassert his dominance through argument, but his heart wasn't in it. His instincts were screaming at him about the quiet man 2 seats away. It is the spirit of the pioneer, the courage of the explorer that drives progress. Finally, Thorne spoke. His voice was calm, measured, and devoid of any discernible emotion. It cut through the rising tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "If I may," he said, addressing the room at large. All heads turned towards him. While Terra has no direct stake in this matter, it seems the core of the dispute is a philosophical one. Does ownership derive from seeing a thing first or from making it useful? He paused, letting the question settle. The Cathar argue for the sanctity of the vision. The Signians argue for the sanctity of the system. Perhaps there is a synthesis. The initial charting of a route by the Cathar could be recognized with a permanent tariff right, a percentage of all trade that passes through lanes they discovered. The hegemony's principle of efficient, orderly use could be maintained, ensuring the nebula serves the greater good while still honoring the pioneering spirit of the Imperium. It was a simple, elegant compromise. It was so logical, so reasonable that it was almost insulting. It was the kind of solution a junior arbiter might propose, but coming from Thorne at this moment it carried immense weight. He was not just offering a solution. He was demonstrating a different kind of power, not the physical power of the Cathar, nor the bureaucratic power of the Signians. It was the power of detached, intelligent analysis. He was showing them that while he might possess a terrifying capacity for violence, his first instinct was for order. Delegate Uhl's mandibles twitched in consideration. A tariff system was complex, but it adhered to the logic of regulated commerce. It was a possibility. Lord Vindicator Kalen stared at Thorne, his raptor eyes narrowed. Was this a trick, an attempt to curry favor, or was it a message? I can solve your problems, or I can be your problem. The choice is yours. The Imperium will consider this proposal, Kalen said at last, the words sounding like they were being dragged from his throat. The violet light of the table slowly receded, returning to a cool, stable blue. A collective, unspoken sigh of relief passed through the chamber. The crisis had been averted, but as the meeting adjourned and the delegates filed out, a new, more profound tension had settled over Aegis Station. The question was no longer about transit lanes or trade tariffs. The question was Elias Thorne. The question was humanity. And in the quiet corridors of the station, in the private quarters of the most powerful beings in the sector, everyone was scrambling to find an answer. In his personal chambers, a space designed to mimic a high-altitude Cathar roost with simulated winds, and a panoramic view of a swirling gas giant, Lord Vindicator Kalen tore a strip of raw meat from a haunch with a vicious snap of his beak. He was still vibrating with the aftershocks of the encounter. His second-in-command, a younger, leaner Cathar named Tyrax, stood by silently, his own feathers ruffled in agitation. "Did you see it, Tyrax?" Kalen demanded, swallowing the meat whole. The eyes, there was no life in them, no spark of fear. It was like looking at the void. "I saw my Lord Vindicator," Tyrax said, his voice a respectful croak. He did not react as the scans predicted. The psych profiles on the humans suggested a species prone to emotional outbursts, pack bonding, and territorial aggression that presents as bluster. Profiles were wrong. Or incomplete. Kalen paced the length of the roost, his talons clicking loudly now on the stone floor. The sound was a release of nervous energy. "I have faced down Glyptodan battle masters. I have stared into the core of a Signian hiveship. I have never felt what I felt today. It was not a challenge. It was a statement of fact." "What fact, my lord?" Kalen stopped and turned to face his subordinate. His eyes were wide with a kind of horrified revelation. That he was not the one in danger. He remembered the feeling. The circling was a ritual, a way of measuring a potential rival. You watch their breathing, the dilation of their pupils, the subtle shift of muscle. You learn everything you need to know, but with Thorne there was nothing to read. It was like trying to measure the tide by staring at a granite cliff. And then the look. It hadn't been a threat, it had been an offer of knowledge. The human had looked at him and offered to teach him the true meaning of finality. "The reports," Kalen rasped. "The full data packets on human history we received from the Luminous Archive. I merely skimmed the summaries. I want every file, every record of their conflicts. I want to know what kind of world forges a creature like that. Tyrax bowed his head. It shall be done, my lord. The data is extensive. They are a young species, but a prolific one, especially in the art of war. Do not doubt it, Kalen muttered, turning to stare out at the beautiful, deadly swirl of the gas giant. I looked into the eyes of a creature that has made an art of it and then grown tired of its own masterpiece. Away, in the sterile, functional quarters assigned to the Terran delegation, Elias Thorne sat at a simple desk, sipping a cup of black tea. The room was quiet, the air recycled and tasting faintly of ozone and metal. His aide, a bright-eyed young woman named Anya Sharma, was pacing back and forth, her face flushed with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I thought he was going to tear your head off, Elias. My heart is still hammering, the way he just circled you, and you just sat there. Thorne took another sip of tea. He felt a deep weariness settling into his bones, a fatigue that had nothing to do with the day's negotiations. He was just taking my measure, Anya. It's what his species does, a display of dominance. A display? It felt like the prelude to a public execution. And then what you didn't even raise your voice. You just looked at him and he flinched. A Cathar warlord flinched. Thorne set his cup down and finally looked at her. His eyes were no longer the flat ice of the council chamber. Here in private they held a profound sadness. I didn't do anything, Anya, I just let him see. What? She asked, her voice hushed. He hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound monstrous. He sees the galaxy as a hierarchy of predators and prey. He needed to know which one I was, so I let him see the conclusion of that line of thinking. He stood up and walked to the room's single viewport, which looked out onto the same starfield as the one in the council chamber. On Tantalus 4, during the Unification War, my platoon was cut off for 3 weeks. We were hunted by bioengineered chimeras, creatures designed for psychological terror. They mimicked the sounds of our loved ones while they tore our comrades apart. We ran out of ammo on day 5. We ran out of food on day 9. We survived the next 12 days. He didn't need to elaborate. The silence in the room filled in the horrifying details. Anya stared at his back, her excitement curdling into a knot of cold dread in her stomach. The Cathar thinks violence is a tool for dominance, Thorne said, his voice quiet. He thinks it's about being the strongest, the fastest, the most fearsome. He doesn't understand. He's never had to learn the real lesson. What lesson? Anya whispered. Thorne's reflection in the viewport was a ghost against the backdrop of a billion stars. That true violence isn't a tool, it's a state of being. It's the suspension of all other things, hope, fear, mercy, even self-preservation, in favor of a single, ugly imperative, to make the other things stop, permanently. When you have lived in that state, when you have had to make it your home, you learn to keep the door locked. Kalen was rattling the handle. I just showed him the key. He turned back to her, a faint, sad smile on his lips. He thinks he's a predator, but a predator kills to eat to survive. It's a natural function. We humans, we're the only species I know of that has perfected the art of killing for an idea, and that makes us something else entirely. He felt the abyss that we've stared into, and it scared him. So what happens now? Anya asked. Now, Thorne said, picking up his cold teacup, we negotiate. Only now they'll be listening. The data streams poured into Lord Vindicator Kalen's private terminal, a torrent of information compiled by the Luminous and shared, as per protocol, with all council members upon the official first contact with a new species. Kalen had dismissed it before. What could a species barely capable of interstellar travel teach a millennia-old Imperium? He watched now with a growing sense of dread. He skipped past the cultural achievements, the soaring music, the intricate art, the profound philosophies. He went straight for the marrow, for the history of their conflicts. It was a litany of horrors that made his warrior's soul recoil. The scale was obscene, the ingenuity perverse. The Cathar fought wars for territory, for resources, for honor. They were brutal, efficient, and final. But the humans, they fought for ideas. They fought over the nature of their gods, the color of their skin, the structure of their economies. They fought over slights and insults, over pieces of paper and imagined futures. He saw crude, black-and-white footage of trenches filled with mud and bodies, men charging into machine guns for a few meters of barren earth. He saw cities turned to radioactive glass. the shadows of their inhabitants permanently etched onto the walls. He saw genetically engineered plagues, cybernetic warfare, soldiers driven mad by mimetic agents designed to unravel the very concept of self. They had turned their own planet, a paradise of blues and greens, into a laboratory for new and more creative ways to kill each other. And then they stopped. That was the part that truly baffled Kalen. After millennia of seemingly gleeful self-destruction, they had reached the brink of total annihilation and pulled back. They had, through some monumental act of collective will, forged a global government. They had outlawed war among themselves, dismantled their most terrible weapons, and turned their ferocious, obsessive energy outward toward the stars. They were not a peaceful species. They were a species that had exhausted its own capacity for violence and had, by necessity, imposed a peace upon itself. They were like a supernova that had, by some miracle, learned to contain its own fusion. Tyrax entered the roost, his steps hesitant. "My lord, the analysis of Delegate Thorne's biography is complete." "Me," Kalen commanded, not taking his eyes from a holographic display showing a grainy image of a soldier with hauntingly familiar pale eyes, standing over the wreckage of some biomechanical horror. "Elias Thorne. Military service record exemplary. Fought in the final unification conflict, the Chimera uprising on Tantalus IV. Awarded the Star of Terra for actions undertaken behind enemy lines. The details are heavily redacted, classified at the highest level by the Terran government. What is known is that his unit of 30 soldiers was declared lost. He was the sole survivor, discovered weeks later, surrounded by the remains of over 200 enemy combatants. The official report states they were eliminated through unconventional means." Kalen felt a coldness spread through his chest, a feeling alien to his warm-blooded physiology. Unconventional means, he now understood. Thorne wasn't a diplomat with a soldier's past. He was a weapon that had been put in a diplomat's uniform. His calm wasn't discipline, it was containment. "What else?" Kalen pressed. After his military service, he entered the diplomatic corps. His rise was meteoric. He specializes in post-conflict resolution and first contact with potentially hostile civilizations. His operational philosophy is summarized in one of his own writings. "Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of a superior method for its resolution. When all other methods fail, however, one must be prepared to be that superior method." Kalen switched off the display. The room fell into silence, broken only by the faint, simulated wind. "He didn't offer a compromise today, Tyrax. He offered a demonstration. He solved our petty squabble over the nebula to show us how his mind works. It is a mind that seeks order, but it is a mind that will achieve that order by any means necessary." Lord Vindicator finally understood the human's unnerving stillness. It was the stillness of a bomb disposal expert, a being who deals with catastrophic potential so often that they no longer register the mundane anxieties of others. Kalen had postured and threatened, the equivalent of a child waving a firecracker, and Thorne had looked at him with the weary patience of a man who knows how to dismantle a thermonuclear device with his bare hands. "Our strategy must change," Kalen declared. "Intimidation is useless. Probing for weakness is suicide. We will engage them on the basis of logic and mutual interest. We will treat them not as prey, not as rivals, but as a force of nature that must be understood and, if possible, steered." "And if it cannot be steered?" Tyrax asked quietly. Kalen looked at the starfield beyond his window. "Then we pray it is a benevolent one." Next session of the convocation was a study in altered dynamics. When Elias Thorne entered the chamber, a respectful silence fell. Delegate Ool gave a slight, formal bow of its upper carapace. Matriarch Voral's ancient eyes followed him with a new, intense focus. And when Thorne took his seat, Lord Vindicator Kalen, from across the great ring, gave him a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture between warriors, a sign of acknowledged strength that transcended species and protocol. Thorne returned the nod, his expression unchanged. The topic was humanity's petition for membership. Before, it had been a matter of condescending consideration. Now, it was the most urgent item on the agenda. Delegate Ool spoke first, its voice precise. "The Cygnian hegemony has reviewed the Terran petition. While their technological level is, adequate, their history of internal conflict is a significant concern. The potential for instability is high. Before, this would have been a damning critique. Now it felt like a soft opening. Matriarch Vorl's voice, a low rumble like shifting continents, filled the chamber for the first time in days. A history of conflict can also be a history of resilience. A species that has survived its own foolishness may have learned wisdom that others have not been forced to acquire. The Enclave values survival above all else. The humans have proven they are survivors. Then J. Hill, the luminous, shimmered. Its voice was like soft chimes. We have felt the human consciousness. It is a storm of contradictions, a capacity for profound cruelty and a capacity for breathtaking empathy. They have destroyed their world and then healed it. They have slaughtered one another and then bound their wounds. They are not one thing but many. To judge them on their past is to miss the totality of their present. The question is not what they were, but what they choose to be now. All eyes turned to Kalen. The Cathar vote was the swing. Their Imperium was the dominant military power in the sector. Their approval or denial would carry immense weight. The Lord Vindicator rose to his full, impressive height. His plumage seemed less like a threat now and more like a mantle of office. The Cathar Imperium values strength, he said, his voice a clear, strong rasp. We have always believed that strength is proven in conquest, in the subjugation of the weak by the strong. It is the law of the universe. He paused, and his gaze fell on Elias Thorne. The human delegation has encouraged a re-evaluation of this belief. We looked at humanity and saw a soft, weak prey species. We were wrong. We saw a chaotic, self-destructive race. We were mistaken. We have come to understand that there is a different kind of strength. The strength to face the worst parts of oneself and not be consumed by them. The strength to master one's own nature. He looked around the table at the other delegates. Humanity is dangerous. Their potential for destruction is undeniable. But a blade is also dangerous, yet in the hand of a skilled surgeon it can heal. Delegate Thorne has shown us that his people understand the nature of the blade. They do not glorify it, they respect it. And they seek to use it to build, not to destroy. He drew himself up. The Cathar Imperium votes in favor of probationary membership for the Terran Alliance. Let them join us. Let us learn from their terrible history so that we do not have to repeat it. A wave of relief washed through the chamber. The table glowed a warm, welcoming gold. Elias Thorne allowed himself a small, almost invisible exhalation. He had not won a battle. He had not intimidated an enemy. He had forced a dialogue. He had made them see past their assumptions and look at the complex, messy, and ultimately hopeful truth of his species. Later, in the neutral observation lounge, overlooking the vast docking bay of Aegis Station, Thorne stood watching the endless traffic of ships. He sensed a presence behind him and turned. It was Lord Vindicator Kalen alone. "Delegate Thorne," the Cathar said. It was not a challenge or a greeting, but a simple acknowledgement. "Lord Vindicator," Thorne replied, his voice even. For a long moment they stood in silence, two beings from opposite ends of a biological and philosophical spectrum, united by a shared understanding of violence. "For," Kalen said softly, "the records were sealed, but I have my sources. I know what the chimeras were, I know what they did." Thorne did not reply, he just watched the ships. "To survive that," Kalen continued, his voice laced with a reluctant awe, "to face that and remain sane. To become what you are now, a builder, a peacemaker, that is a strength my people have never had to learn." "Is a luxury, Lord Vindicator," Thorne said, his gaze distant. "It can only be afforded by those who understand its price. My people paid in advance, for a very, very long time." Kalen stepped closer, a gesture that would have been an unimaginable threat just days ago. Now it felt like a form of communion. "I owe you an apology, Elias Thorne. My actions in the chamber were born of arrogance and ignorance. A leader of my standing should not be so easily led by instinct." "No apology is necessary," Thorne said, turning to face the warlord. "Your instincts were not wrong. You sensed a threat, you were just mistaken about its target," tilted his great feathered head. "Explain." "Thought the threat was directed at you," Thorne said. "It wasn't. It was directed at the part of me that is still on Tantalus 4. It was a warning to myself. The calm you saw, it's the leash I keep on that part of me. You were testing the strength of the chain." A profound understanding dawned in Kalen's raptor eyes. He was not looking at a monster contained. He was looking at a man holding a monster at bay. And in that moment, the warlord of the Cathar Imperium did something unprecedented. He lowered his head in a deep avian bow, a gesture of ultimate respect reserved for the greatest of Cathar heroes. "The galaxy is fortunate that you are the one holding the leash, Elias Thorne," he said. Thorne watched him for a moment, then gave a slight nod in return. "We all have our leashes, Lord Vindicator. The important thing is that we hold them together." Kalen turned and walked away, his talons clicking softly on the deck. Thorne looked back out at the stars. The negotiations were over, but the work was just beginning. Humanity had a seat at the table. They had been judged not by the innocence of their beginnings, but by the hard-won wisdom of their violent past. It was a fragile peace, a frightening responsibility. But for a man who had walked through hell, it felt, for the first time in a long while, like coming home.